We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices. We're excited to welcome today our guest, Damon Brown, who is a best-selling author, public speaker, and entrepreneurial coach here today to discuss a pretty big topic around how leaders can really show up for underrepresented communities experiencing trauma. Very relevant topic for this year and today. First off, Damon, how are you?
I'm well. My family, I have a young family. They're 8 and 5 with my partner, and we're sheltering in place, staying safe. So yeah, we're healthy. Can't ask for more than that. So.
No, that's good. I love it. And I appreciate the bookshelf that is behind you as well with a couple of your books. If you could tell the people who are listening right now a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, the work that you do, and also just one of your hobbies, that would be great.
Oh, for sure. In fact, I think I might have my hobby with me, but it's downstairs. I love to crochet. And so I've actually crocheted blankets. Of course, I don't have any with me. My kids are actually, you can hear them in the background, they're actually playing with one of my blankets. So that's been a hobby of mine for, going on 20 years. I learned it from my favorite aunt. So
that's amazing.
It's nice to do things with your hands and it's almost like a meditative state. But again, my name is Damon Brown. I go by he and him. I've been a journalist for a very long time. And then about 7-8 years ago, around the time my first son came, and I became the primary caretaker when my wife went back to work. That was the same time I became an entrepreneur. I ended up doing 2 startups, both bootstrapped. The second one called Cuddlr, Connected People for Hugs, ended up becoming the surprise hit. We had the #1 app in several countries. We ended up selling it about a year after we launched it. And that was right after my son's 2nd birthday. And so now I'm dedicating to helping what I call non-traditional entrepreneurs. So people who are side hustlers, people who are solopreneurs like myself. Again, I'm a full-time dad. And so helping other people on that journey. I'm African-American. My wife is actually originally from India. And so really trying to uplift, again, the different communities that are underrepresented, like you said at the top of the show. And that's what I'm dedicated to. And my new book is called Built From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, Nourish the World. So this is a new book. So very excited about it. And just trying to help people on their journey. I have an online quiz you can take to learn your best business resources at builtfromnowquiz.com. And I have a YouTube show that I just launched a few months ago called the Bring Your Worst Show. Yeah, so it's youtube.com/Brown Damon. Christina, I know that you watched a few episodes. So I appreciate your support. So thank you. It's like I love incubating new things and trying to, what are we, like 13 months into the pandemic? Yeah. I know you're over in New York. I'm based over in Vegas. We both have been hit hard. And so Built From Now is really kind of, what are we doing post-pandemic? The book just came out a couple months ago, and it really was designed for what's the blueprint that we're going to need to make a more equitable society. And that really starts with us.
Absolutely. And that's so important. And throughout all of your experiences, I definitely see this common thread of really empowering others and like passing it on in terms of resources and just the knowledge and experience that you have as an entrepreneur. And one of the kind of TED Talks that you talked about as well is how to build power wherever you are. It's a topic that's in your most recent book that you talked about. Why do you think it's important, especially right now, to really talk about and address, building power, using your resources in this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe one of my favorite sayings, and I believe it might be Mandarin, but it's another Eastern Asian language, as well as in Latin, the word for chaos also means opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think about that all the time. So you think about the last year and a half, for some of my friends over in Asia, almost 2 years, we've been going through this, and we have this rare opportunity to do like a restart or a reset. Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious. That's why my last TED Talk was about power, because I over the years, I thought it was about empowering other people, but now I'm realizing I'm helping other people understand the power that they already have. Mm-hmm. And we have so much power. It's like we can change all these systems. And I can go down the laundry list, but that would probably take up our 45 minutes. But all the different power structures, the systemic things that we have, as I talk about in Built From Now, they're all resettable. There's a certain point where someone or a group of people said, this is a system that we want. This is best for our particular people or culture or group or whatever. That was decided at some period of time. And so it can be undecided, right? And so we're assuming that the reality that we have right now is just how it is. And I've always been against the grain with that, where I'm like, no, this was thought up, this was created. And so if it can be created, then it can be uncreated and built with some, you can rebuild it with something more proper or more equitable for the rest of the world. But that requires each and every one of us in our different communities to understand the power we already have, you know? And it feels like the perfect time to have that discussion. I mean, when's the next time the world's going to stop? Let's do it now, you know?
Exactly. There's no time like the present right now. I know this past year, a lot of people are thinking about what kind of impact they want to have on the world too. And really, how do you use whatever platform you have and the power you have to make some kind of difference in your community as well. And just going back to that mentorship piece and your role as an entrepreneurial coach, what has really motivated you for, focusing on solopreneurs and non-traditional entrepreneurs to really, help them in their journey of creating their company or their business?
It's a really good question. The things that are making the biggest impact right now are from individual or small group effects. So we can go straight to startups. I used to live in Silicon Valley. So you think about the startups that are so-called ruling the world. They started with one person or two people or three people with an idea, right? If you want to go on the business side, I think the Fortune, it's the S&P 500, I believe. More than half of the companies that are on it, which represents, the so-called lifeblood of America, more than half of the companies that are on it were actually made after I was born. And I'm not that old. And so it's like, so within the last few decades, it's like all these new things are happening. Therefore, again, back to the original point, right? Therefore, if we're going to make impact in the world, again, I got two little kids. So, I'm looking at generationally, which we all should be. When I'm gone, it's like, what kind of world are they going to be adults in? Right? And so if we're thinking in that way, and most of the most powerful, so-called most powerful companies right now were invented within our lifetimes, then it's like, let's take that 30 years ahead. So the things that we're doing now, again, built from now, the things we're doing now are going to impact the next two generations, let's say. So the decisions we make now are going to do that. But, from, as they say, from small acorns, grows mighty oaks. And so that's why I'm really interested in these side hustlers, the solopreneurs, the non-traditional entrepreneurs that I identify with for two reasons. Number one, I understand their journey because I'm one of them. That helps. So with my business book and the work that I do, I'm not telling people to do stuff. It's like, no, actually, this is the pathway. So I understand what you're going through if you're juggling a million things, which most of us are. I'd say the second part, and it goes back to Ava DuVernay, who I opened the book with in regards to the African-American filmmaker, of course. And she talks about not wanting a seat at the table, but actually wanting her own table and her own likeness of her people. And so with technology, again, back to Silicon Valley, with the things that are afforded to us, even what we're doing right now, like we're sheltering in place, but we're having this, conversation, the power that we have now as individuals and groups as we work together, that's unprecedented. So if there are systemic issues that need to be revised, it's going to come from us. And I heard the story from, my African-American fathers, from my grandfathers, and even before them, I was lucky enough to briefly know my great-grandfather. I heard their stories. They did not have so much power as we do. And so our powers as individuals and then together, when we work together, is unprecedented. I want us to take advantage of this time. I've been working with non-traditional entrepreneurs for, again, after I sold my startup, so probably a good 6 years or so. And, doing my books, most recently Built From Now. And so I've been kind of beating this drum for a little while. And now it's like, okay, it's time.
It's time. The time is now. Build for now, build for the future.
Right.
And no, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned too is just addressing these systemic issues, like, thinking about flipping the system because, the people who are building it and these companies that are part of our society most oftentimes aren't from underrepresented communities. And it's really important to really provide those resources and teach folks how to kind of build their power and use their superpower, if you will. But before we talk about how companies can really support individuals as part of this community, I want to start out with the definition of who are underrepresented communities, and specifically focusing on, folks that are most likely left out of the conversation. We know that a lot of companies are focused on hiring underrepresented talent as well from diverse communities. So wanted to ask, in your opinion, who are we talking about before we dive into that conversation?
That's such a great question. I'm glad you asked that. For underrepresented, and in my terminology, the non-traditional entrepreneurs or creators, there'll be people who are people of color, people who identify as women or non-gender specific, people who are part of the LGBTQ community, and in that more broader scope, people who are underrepresented, people who are over-mentored but underfunded. Which is one of my favorite terms right now. I've not come up with that term, but I love it. And then people who are overlooked. And to add just a little bit of a layer to that, I think it's important because there's certain things that are unique to your community and certain things that are unique to the communities I'm a part of too. And so if there are systemic issues, it's because quick sidebar, you think of something like the Framingham study, I believe that's what it's called. So I used to do some side work with with doctors and so forth. But the Framingham study, it's this famous study that happened in New England where they studied adults over the course of 40 years, and that ended up helping determine the BMI, right? So the body mass index, determining heart attacks and so forth. But then almost the entire group that they studied over the course of 30 to 40 years, all of them were white. And I think almost all of them were white males. So then you have someone who's like my mother, who's African-American woman, and the signs that she has might be they will be completely different, right? Because body-wise, we're completely different as far as BMI, as far as the signs for a heart attack and all that. But a quick sidebar where that brings back to why I do the work that I do, because what I'm bringing to the table is based on my different relatives and my perspectives from my community.
Absolutely.
And a straight white male can't do that. Right? And no offense to him, proverbially, no offense to him. It's just, he literally can't do that. It's like, I can't do that for his community. And so if the people in the room, as they say in Hamilton, if the people who are in the room say, this is how it should be, then there's literally 99% of the world, at least here in America, who's not being represented. And I think that's what the definition is as far as underrepresented. And that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why it's the time to talk about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the time to talk about it now. And there's this kind of, you would argue, a new responsibility for companies to really support not only all employees in that encapsulating, catch-all term, but really employees from these underrepresented communities, because there's so much going on. There has been so much going on for years and years, but right now a lot of companies are speaking out to support employees, for example, Black employees, AAPI communities, as these cyclical traumas are happening in society. And I would love to know, in your opinion, what does it look like in practice for these companies and organizations to really support communities that are not performative, if that makes sense?
Sure. You took the word right out of my mouth. Performative. It's like the buzzword, and it should be the buzzword. I'm glad there's a word for it now. So I'd say the first thing is to listen, and to listen to the stories that are being told. I found that as a coach, because I do a lot of one-on-one coaching, but I've also found that as a parent, which is really tough. But I've also found that as a leader, where you can't really help to heal any type of so-called issues without having sympathy, and most importantly, some type of empathy for what other people are going through. So there's communities that I'm not a part of, but there's some of the people that I coach. And so it's like, so the best thing I can do is listen and then try to help them find their power within that journey, not give them power. I think that's I have an issue with that, where it's like, I can't give someone else power. someone who's a founder, because I work with a lot of founders, someone who's a founder, someone who's a leader, whatever term you want to use, you can't like give someone else power. Mm-hmm. You can help them identify what their power is, because every person that walks within your office or in your community has power. I don't care if they're like the custodial assistant, or if they're the principal, or they're the main person in charge, whatever. Everyone has an agency of power. The main thing we can do is to hold a space for that agency of power. Mm-hmm. That's, to me as a leader, that's what our job is. And if you happen to be the one who has the power because of, for lack of a better term, privilege or opportunity, or maybe there's certain barriers that you didn't have to deal with that other people have to deal with, then it's your job to leave that space open, because you have the power to leave that space open. As someone who identifies as a man and who looks like a man, there's certain opportunities that I have in America that other people don't. So it's my job to make a space for that. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons why I do the work that I do, where it's like, yeah, people are saying stuff to me that they wouldn't say to somebody else. There's insights that they're giving me that they wouldn't give to anybody else, mm-hmm. which sucks. My job is to give that away to other people, so it's more equitable. So I'd say number one, listening and recognizing the power of the people that are around you. Excuse me. I'd say number two, but you kind of hit it already, getting out of the performative. And so that's why I'm proud of like the work that I'm doing and the new book. If you go back through my catalog over the past 5, 6, 7 years, you'll see the same message. And so now it's so-called our time, but I've been having this discussion with folks for going on a decade now, right? That's how we show up. And so the way that we can build trust within organizations, I think I love Adam Grant's work, and he talks about psychological safety. Esther Perel talks about that as well. Yeah. But psychological, right? So psychological safety, because that's a level of intimacy. So there's so many people that are like, well, I want my, African-American employees. I want my Asian employees, AAPI, as you say. I want people to be able to come to me. I want to be a trusted individual. But if you only do that, during the George Floyd trial, mm-hmm. and then, hopefully it'll wrap up soon, and then 3 months from now, you're not acknowledging that. You're not thinking about that. If you only do that during a shooting, then of course it's performative, because really giving a space for other people is number one done when it isn't convenient for you, which I learned that from someone else. I wish I remember who said that. I read so many books, but someone said that. It's like, real strength and holding a space for someone else is number one happens when it's not convenient for you, right? If it's performative, it's convenient because you get clout for that, as we say nowadays. Excuse me. But then the second part about it is that you show up that way, whether you're on camera or not, whether it's part of the national stage or not, and that's how you establish trust, doing it consistently. The people that I trust in my life, the people I've done business with and all that, they show up the same way all the time. You shouldn't need to bring in a DEI expert and then suddenly you're on your P's and Q's. That's some work that you can actually do on your own. No offense to DEI experts. I'm actually friends with some of them. I'm not saying that's a bad industry. I'm just saying that can be performative. And it's like, well, we're going to bring this person in and then I can offload this. And it's like, no, it's still your responsibility. And it comes from the conversations you have with your employees. It comes with the dynamics you have, frankly, with your family and your friends. It comes from, again, like myself, like I've done 4 TED Talks. So I'm coming from a place of privilege. I go to TED like every year. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not, I have a level of privilege. But then me actually taking that information and giving it to other people, bringing people into TED and getting them on the stage, giving them all my game, all my insight and sharing it with them. That's how you do that. You don't have to do that, but you should. And if you do that repeatedly, then you can build that trust. As you build that trust, then your employees and the people that you're leading will begin to open up to you and have those discussions. You just randomly having a beer with someone and saying, open up to me about Black trauma. It's like,
absolutely not.
Exactly. Yeah, there's not that many beers in the world. you know?
Exactly. No, I think that definitely makes sense. What I'm hearing you say is really to create that equitable environment, you need to carve out this space, especially as a leader, especially as someone who definitely is aware of the identities you hold in the world. And also, there's no way that you can know what someone else is experiencing as well. But then again, part of that active listening is not just saying, hi, I'm acknowledging you, I'm hearing from you and observing. It's just taking that next step where it's everyone's responsibility to create that psychological safety, to have continuous conversations, continuously showing up, and not just showing up during, as a reactive approach to this kind of work. And I also have another question. I feel like I might know the answer based on what you just said in terms of just practicing, showing up consistently. But a lot of companies are issuing statements during very specific time periods after a traumatic event to really show that they support employees and that they stand with them. Do you think that it is always important for companies to make that public statement externally or internally for employees? And if this is the first time they're doing so, and if they do consistently from that point on make the effort to create this space, is it a necessary part of the process? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a tough question because particularly not so much now, but say about a year ago, it was a lot of that discussion where people were coming to me. They were like, well, should I say something or should I not say something? Is me not saying something condoning this in regards to African American trauma around the three major deaths in the spring? And number one, as let's say, sounds like you already know the answer to this part. If you already have that environment, then you don't necessarily need to make a statement about it. They already know how you feel, right? Mm-hmm. So just like any other type of relationship, as they say, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So if you know that you have a thoughtful, psychologically safe environment, and then, Breonna Taylor was murdered the night before, and then, some of the people are crying on Zoom, that in itself is proof. So if anything, it becomes, and they call it engineering, I think they call it a shock test, mm-hmm. where they'll go and they'll test the bridge before they put cars on it. That becomes like your shock test. How open, how transparent, how psychologically safe are the different people, are the different communities in showing up as their true selves in your work environment, right? So I'd say the reverse of that, where that becomes a test. Are they being their true selves around you? And if not, then you might have to ask some questions. I'd say the second part about that, which I mentioned earlier, is that it's fine doing statements, but if you already know what your culture is about, and if you talk about brands, where I work with some brands, the people know what your culture is about. You don't have to say anything. I already know what Ben and Jerry feels about the spat of shootings over the last day. I already know. They don't need to make a statement to me. I'm like, I already know how they feel. I've never been to Vermont. You know what I mean? But I already know what they represent. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like someone sees some of my stuff, they know what I represent. I don't need to make a statement. I don't need to be, protesting. I'm in Vegas again, so I don't need to be protesting down in the Strip with respect to the people that are protesting. But they already know. If someone grabs my book, they're like, oh, okay. I don't need to make a statement. They already know how I feel. And so you making statements isn't going to rectify or create psychological safety in your environment. So if you're looking at it as a silver bullet or as a panacea, that's not it. All right. So that'll be number two. And I'd say number three, and I think you got at this, and I think it was a really, really poignant point that you're making, where when these things do happen, it is an opportunity for a so-called turnaround and to bring these things out of the mud and to really discuss them. Mm-hmm. But it has to be a continual conversation. So the performative part, I don't think is putting the statement out. I think the performative part is that you put the statement out, you put a black box in your Instagram, and then, you're trying to sell stuff a month later. So what is that continual dedication of showing up? So if you haven't shown up already, there's an opportunity to show up. But then if you do show up now, you got to stay in the game.
Absolutely. Staying in the game is important, showing the evidence that you do actually support your employees on either if it's an individual level, it's a one-on-one conversation. I think there's also a new conversation around the responsibility of managers and the accountability there as well to check in on your people. You don't have to make this huge statement on Slack or on LinkedIn, but I think acknowledging this experience is super important as well and continuing to do the work, as you said. Are there other ways, in your opinion, that really model bringing hard conversations into the workplace now that maybe you wouldn't beforehand, or any advice to folks who really want to, either as a team member, a manager, an individual contributor, especially with folks who you may not have met in person, but you do want to build that trust and relationship with them. And part of that is having these hard conversations, being vulnerable, being empathetic, and really putting yourself out there when there's no, black and white, correct or wrong answer.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it hard. And I'm glad you phrased the question that way, because there is no black and white answer. It is a very gray territory. I'll give a quick example. It was a group that I was working with, and they ended up reaching out and they said, listen, we're very white. This is their terminology. It's like, we're very white and we want to bring other voices into this conversation. Are there other people of color, particularly women of color, that you think are of this caliber that you can recommend for this opportunity? And I was like, yes. Pull out my Rolodex.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you kidding? When do you need them? Right, that's my network. Mm-hmm. But a simple thing like that, it wasn't on LinkedIn. No offense to LinkedIn. It wasn't on LinkedIn like a call to action. Well, as a group, we're trying to do something more equitable, and it's like a hashtags and all. It's like no. It was a message on Slack or email or something, but it was something that was private, just to me. And so that does three things. Number one, it helps me recognize my value to them, and they see my worth, not just as someone who's like a plug to women of color, but also someone who's a trusted advisor. I guess that would be the word. So number one, they're recognizing my worth. Number two, I can help these very qualified, overqualified folks get in the room, which is my MO, which is probably why they asked me, which again, helped me recognize my own worth, and they recognize that I see that they recognize my worth. So it's tongue twister there. So that part. Then the third part, though, it was private and it was honest. It's like, yeah, I know them. It's like, yeah, I know you guys are really white. Yeah, sure. And they're like, yeah, we recognize it too. And I'm like, okay, good. Like, we need to mix it up again. It's like, yeah, you sure do. All right. Can you help with that? Right. I can. And so that's a really simple example. And hopefully it helps answer your question, where it's not performative. It was done in a respectful way, and everyone recognizes their worth. And now there are other, like there are women of color now who have opportunities because of the bridge that I was able to make, but that only came from the leadership at the organization that I was working with saying, hey, we actually need some of your insight because we know we want to be more equitable.
Absolutely.
And they're not putting, they're not putting all this stuff on social media. I think that's one way to do it. Yeah.
I think that's a great conversation to have with someone. I think it's really important to acknowledge, hey, there is a problem here. There's a problem. We don't know how to solve it, but we do have the intention of hiring more women of color. We want to also, when they get here, pay them and promote them to their level and value, which is really important there. But it is hard to say, hey, this isn't something that we have thought of. It's 2021. We want to be vulnerable with you, Damon, and ask for your help. Asking for help is also really vulnerable as well. I also wanted to ask, in your opinion, too, I mean, it's a nice to have in order for, to be at a place that really values you as an individual, but specifically for companies truly supporting underrepresented communities during times of trauma, 365 days a year, and really establishing that trust. How do you see this manifesting towards the bottom line of a company and the overall, workplace environment?
Yeah, I see it on a few different levels. The first one is the Ben and Jerry's analogy, where it's like, I mean, they were one of the first groups that was so-called political back when, many, many years ago. But now it's not political, it's just actually representing something. So I know if they're coming out as equitable in a public forum, then chances are very strong that they're equitable within their organization. Again, how you do one thing is usually how you do everything. So I'd say that's part of the discussion. I'd say the second part is thinking about the people that you're actually serving. And it's been disheartening where there's so many organizations whose bottom line is directly tied to the marginalized or underrepresented communities that that you're talking about and that I've been helping coach. But then they're not actually reflective of that in their board of directors. They're not reflective of that, obviously, in their C-suite. They might not even be
happening.
Right. They might not even be reflective of that in their employees or in their basic staff, And so actually having your community reflected within your organization makes more sense. And I mean, I'm not just talking about, like, I'd say 10 years ago when I was in Silicon Valley, that was like a nice to have. It's like, oh, we should because we're good people. It's like what they call it, virtue signaling. I can never get it out. Virtue signaling, as they call it now. They didn't have a term for it back then. But it's like, that's because we're good people and it's a meritocracy. And so this is what we do. And it's like, no, actually, it hits your bottom line directly. You find this a lot in social media, which I've done a lot of studying in, and other places where, particularly for African Americans and particularly women of color, particularly African American women, we end up being the ones that put our, 75 cents on the dollar into these organizations, into these brands, getting free content or pushing free content onto these platforms. And then we're not represented at the top. Or if we are represented, then we're represented in such a less than empowering viewpoint. We're not given that seat at the table, even though we've earned that. And so I think that's part of the discussion too. If you want to be more business/capitalist focused on it, then understand that myself, yourself, other folks that represent these different communities, we are getting to the point, and some of us have already gotten to the point where we're building our own tables. And so it doesn't matter if you feel like being equitable. Doesn't matter if you feel like it's charity. It doesn't matter if you feel like it's a political thing and, you think it's clout chasing and all that. Your bottom line is being affected probably already because there's alternatives to that. So in my own instance, with me being a more inclusive coach, then there's discussions that I can have with all the, it's been hundreds going on thousands of people that I've coached. There's conversations that I can have with them and a comfort level that they have with me that they might not find in other coaches that aren't as inclusive. And so I'm a microcosm of that. And so as technology builds, as we get more empowered by the opportunities that we have, we start having more conversations. As the world just stopped, and then we're back to zero in some ways, then the rebuilding of systems, it's going to become a point where diversity, if you're not involved in diversifying your staff, it's like having all men at your company. It's like not having any minority representation as you're building an organization that you hope to be $1 billion. How can you have $1 billion organization, but then you're not representing any other underrepresented groups? Who do you think is going to buy from you? Because at a certain point, the so-called mainstream person is going to cap out, and then you're going to want to expand to other countries. You're going to expand to other genders, expand to other communities. And by the time you get to us, we could have already built our own thing. And so that discussion was happening in my parents' generation, even happened back to my grandparents' generation. I talked about that briefly in Built From Now, where my grandparents are from the South. And I heard their discussions of the 40s and the 50s. And I'm like, that echoes that. Even if you go to Black Wall Street, which just had its anniversary about, I think it was last year, where, right? And so you think of Black Wall Street and how we had our own thing, and then it was destroyed, unfortunately, because of the rioting that happened at that period of time. It's worth looking up. That happened because we didn't have the infrastructure to keep it. Now with technology, now with things that, in some cases, technology actually does empower us, then we're actually able to keep it. And so there's a level of structure that's happening here, restructuring within the different communities, within the different underrepresented groups. And there's a level of foundation and scaffolding and just structure that we've never had before. And so that's a benefit to us. I'm helping all of us recognize that, hopefully, with the books, with the TED Talks and all that. But more importantly, for the more, not politically, but more conservative companies, the ones that are looking at DEI and diversity and equity as more of a nice to have. As I was talking about with the S&P 500, they're going to start dropping off of there, because as we connect more, as our world gets more diverse, as it becomes more clear that we're all going to be in it together, then they're going to become the dinosaurs. And it'll be like the Blockbuster compared to the Netflix, not adapting to the new thing. You know? You got me on a rant here, but
no, I love it. I think it's really important to highlight, because as our society is changing, this affects the talent that you're looking to hire. It affects the community that you're serving, and it also affects your customers at the end of the day as well, who's buying your product, whether it's a business or an individual, person as well. So I think that is definitely really important. So love to hear all of your thoughts around that as well. I know we have a couple minutes left, and I definitely wanted to touch on caregiving and supporting parents at work, because I know you were the primary caretaker of your child as well while you were starting your company. And really wanted to ask your opinion too about how companies can support working parents or caregivers in any nature, if they're taking care of someone like a parent, or especially now for COVID as well, just how companies can think about that flexibility and real benefits that actually help folks who have this additional responsibility. And since we are working from home right now, the new world of work is going to be somewhat remote, I think, whether it's 100% or a hybrid approach. How can companies really show that they show up for these folks?
Right. I'd say number one is to ask them what they need. So I think that goes back to the earlier part of the conversation. So you don't know what the parent needs or what the guardian needs. And so number one, just opening up that conversation and listening to what their particular needs are. It might be a longer maternity leave. It might mean longer breaks for feeding, and also for guys, because I did a lot of feeding of my kids when my wife was at work. So it's like, so even for guys, even the idea of SARS paternity leave and all that, figuring out what they actually need to thrive, because we don't know. I mean, my kids are 8 and 5, and so I'm getting further away from those baby and those toddler years. So even if I was a leader or head of an organization, I was trying to help the people who were stay-at-home parents with a new baby or whatever, I could guess, but I'm about 5 or 8 years out of the woods. And so figuring out what their particular needs are. I'd say number two, focusing more, and this has been a common conversation, which I love, focusing more on the execution versus how they do it. And so when I had my 2 startups, and it was from when my first kid was 4 months old to I sold it right after he was 2. So a good, however months that is, 40 months, whatever, 45 months. For that stretch, I would wake up super early in the morning to work on my startup and then take care of my baby during the day. If I was in a traditional corporate structure, that might have not been possible, right? Particularly pre-COVID, right? So now, again, back to the build from now thing, now we're back to square one. I was talking to a major editor earlier this year, and their dog kept barking in the background. Like when I was flying to New York and all that stuff, that would never happen, right? We'd have a martini lunch and it'll be very structured. And it's like, no, Fido won't stop barking. And so I think there's an opportunity to really have empathy and sympathy, because what a lot of us are experiencing working from home, that's what a lot of us parents had been experiencing like the whole time. I remember being on the phone with, I'll just say, a major publication. Um, Let me leave it at that. I was on the phone with a major publication, and I was changing, I think it was my second kid's diaper, and ended up being this major interview, for my second startup, ended up being on the front page. But it's like, but that was life, 5-6 years ago. Everyone's experiencing that now. And so having that level of empathy and sympathy, and once we get back into the office, which we will, and I look forward to traveling later on this year after I get my vaccinations on it. Like, we're going to start moving a little bit, like you said, maybe not 100% remote, but it'll be maybe 50%. I don't want us to forget this lesson. That's why I wrote Build From Now. That's why I'm talking to you. It's like, this moment, I don't want us to forget that, particularly the people who are actually in power right now, the people who are in the rooms, the people who are making the decisions, the people who are holding together the systems that may or may not be oppressive, depending on the system that you're talking about and who you're talking to. I want everyone to remember this moment. This is a once in 100 years moment. So it's like, now that we have this moment, then it's like, okay, remember when the dog was barking in the background? It's 2 years later, they have a baby at home. So maybe there's a level of sensitivity and flexibility as far as focusing on things that get done versus focusing on how they get done. And I think that's a shift that I would welcome heartily. And I want leaders to really think about that as we kind of ideally come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important. It's a super dynamic conversation because as people, we grow in our different parts of our lives as well. And it's not just a one and done conversation as, oh, you have a newborn or you have a teenager at home. It's just different needs at different points. So it needs to be kind of a conversation around feedback and meeting employees where they are. If you only have 5 parents at a 200-person company or something like that, you don't want to alienate them as well. So offering ways for them to feel psychologically safe and giving that feedback and, sharing what they actually need as well is really important too. The last question that I have for you is, how can folks get in touch with you or just keep, abreast about what you are up to over the next few years to come?
Sure. A few years. Oh my gosh. Pressure. And so my new book is called Build From Now, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. I actually own my own publishing imprint. So you're supporting the indie publisher if you grab it from me. So you can learn about it at damonbrown.net. I also have a free quiz that's available at buildfromnowquiz.com. And it'll teach you which of the 4 major resources I talk about in the book, which one you have the most of. One of my favorite sayings is that if you have a hammer, then everything is a nail. But I would push it further and say, what happens if you don't know you have a hammer? And so what I'm trying to do is help people understand, as you mentioned at the top, their own superpower or resource. And in figuring out that resource, and they can go forward. Again, it's a free quiz at buildfromnowquiz.com. Takes 2 minutes, multiple choice. And then I have a regular show that I do every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, so Vegas time. And it's at youtube.com/BrownDamon. And you can learn about the stuff I'm talking about, probably similar to the discussion we're having now, about how we can find our own personal power, how we can make our own imprint and nourish the world, and how we can be equitably paid for it, even if it comes from passive income or us creating our own income streams. I'm really into us not depending 100% on organizations or on individuals to clear a path for us financially or otherwise. And it's wonderful to be at a time. It's proud to be at a time. We can actually create our own income streams. We can help give power or show power to the people that are in our communities. And then based on that, we can help revitalize or change the systems that frankly have oppressed us in the past. So I just want to be part of that journey.
Yes, changing the system, making it more equitable, and really showing people what their power is. I love to see it. Damon, I really appreciated our conversation. Thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. It was great to speak with you. And
thank you, Christina.
Thank you to our viewers for listening here today. At AllVoices, we believe in the empowerment of employees to speak up, and creating a place where employees feel like they can speak up is a need to have, not a nice to have. We'll see you soon.